You mentioned that the now 12-year-old had particularly bad injuries caused by the binding. Can you explain that further?
And we anticipate releasing photos when the public information is released on this.
The 30-day period.
At the end of the 30-day period, he was bound hand and foot with handcuffs around him, and at times he was laid on his stomach, and the handcuffs from his ankles to his wrists were tied, so he was hog-tied in a position that kept his legs off the ground and his arms off the ground for hours at a time. And there is clear evidence of the handcuffs cutting into him and doing harm.
Are you able to describe his phone calls in which you say Hildebrandt lacked remorse?
Yes, and we anticipate releasing those also. And generally, jailhouse calls are private matters, but if you're discussing your criminal acts, then that's not the case.
Can you describe them at all?
And Miss Hildebrandt just has not expressed any remorse and continues to justify her perspective of things. And to the degree that in her mind it's clear that the perpetrator here is the devil and the children, and she is a victim to the devil's grander causes. At the end of the day, this is a case about religious extremism, and I think that Miss Franke's statement kind of got into that. These guys went down a rabbit hole, and Miss Hildebrandt believed that she was regularly talking to God, and Miss Franke was following the direction that she was getting from Miss Hildebrandt. Again, and she alluded to that in her statement. And they felt entirely justified in that they were helping children to repent and casting out devils from children, which is ludicrous and wrong because child abuse is never okay. But that was the mindset that they had at the time, and I think that you saw today. There's good reason to believe that Miss Franke has kind of understood that, and there's not reason to believe that Miss Hildebrandt has.
Ruby Franke also talked about warning signs. Are there going to be potentially more cases down the line here?
Not that we're aware of at this time.
She mentioned, or you mentioned, just this really powerful statement. You said this was a concentration-like setting for these children.
And you look at the images of people that have been stuck in concentration camps and malnourished for a time, and you look at the forced labor and the types of injuries that they have from that, and that's what these kiddos experienced. They were held, they were denied food to the point that is painfully obvious in looking at them. They were left out in the heat without water as a form of punishment, and they were forced to do work in the St. George heat in June and July and August without gloves, but without shoes, being out in the desert, being forced to do labor. If that's not a concentration camp setting, I don't know what is.
We saw Sherry was here, her two older children, right? And her estranged husband, Kevin. Have you been in communication with them? What have they told you?
I have been in communication with them, and I'm not going to get into conversations with them. But I feel for what the family is going through, particularly the youngest, the primary victims. But child abuse is an awful crime, and families have to pick up the pieces.
Those two older kids were really taken aback when Jodi Hildebrandt said, "I dearly love these kids." Their reactions.
They were in disbelief on
Yeah.
this.
What do you make of that?
I obviously couldn't see them from where I was sitting. I can't. You can't climb into people's heads when they've convinced themselves of something, and I don't know that Jodi doesn't. I suspect that Jodi believes everything that she says. Loving kids in a way that is child abuse is a crime that merits prison, right? Like, that's not love, that's abuse. And I suspect that Jodi honestly believed that she was helping these children, that she was casting out devils. But that's not okay. if anybody ever finds themselves in a situation where what you're doing to kids is something that you have to actually hide from your neighbors, that's a pretty good sign that you should stop, right? And clearly that was going on. They were actively hiding things, and because the abuse was horrific, and it would have been apparent to anybody that would have seen the kids that something was wrong here.
Is this some of the worst child abuse you've seen in your career?
Yes, and not just in my career, but in our office's career, in our institutional memory, this is one of the worst child abuse cases we've seen.
You consider this precedent setting?
Can you?
In terms of the actual sentences they end up serving?
No, because I think the board takes everything into account so specifically.
Do you think Jodi's going to end up serving more?
I hope so. I hope that Jodi does serve more. I think that would only be fair. I think that Ruby should serve. So the sentence that they got is basically 4 to 30 years today, right? The 4 1-year minimum stat, and then in Utah you're capped at 30 years. I think that a 4-year minimum for Ruby's actions are entirely appropriate. I hope that Jodi serves more time than that, and I hope that she isn't out of prison until everybody is completely confident that she's no longer a risk. And to get there, she's going to have to acknowledge that she has done wrong, and that you can't use religion as a means to justify your crazy behavior.
Do you think? I'm just trying to understand, why would the mother, in your opinion, deserve less time when she's torturing her kids versus a stranger? Wouldn't you hold the parent more accountable?
And again, so they both got the same deal, right?
Yeah.
Like we didn't give her a less of a minimum time. Part of the mission of what we do when we incarcerate people, I'll obviously want to see justice done. And a mother abusing her children in this way is awful. Awful. And people should go to prison for that. Something that is really important is that people shouldn't be released from prison unless they've hit the maximum amount of time they should be in, or they've done enough that justice is served, and it's clear that they're no longer a risk to the community. And I'm super concerned that Jodi, if she were released today, is a significant risk to gather followers. Ruby was essentially a follower of Jodi, and if she's gathering people and then convincing them to do this kind of thing, that's a huge risk, and those type of people shouldn't be walking the streets when they've committed these kind of crimes.
There was some back and forth with the restitution piece of this. Can you explain where you are with that?
So there were a couple of motions filed over the course of the last month about that, and we anticipate a restitution claim coming in that will cover ongoing therapy and physical care, physical recovery if needed, of the victims of these crimes. The state hasn't submitted a claim for restitution yet, and we want to make sure that there's plenty of time for all of that to be kind of analyzed and brought in before we would close out restitution. And that should be the same for both defendants, right? Like both of them will end up with restitution orders against them, I assume.
Thank you.
Yep, I have a written statement that kind of recapitulates some of what I said in there and just talks a little bit about this. You guys are welcome to have that. We'll email that out also.
Thank you.
And thanks, you guys.
Thank you.